I think that assimilating is easy for someone like me for a variety of reasons. But I also think that it's harmful in lots of ways because you have to shed entire parts of yourself all the time to do that. And so I think when I first got here and I was a teenager, I spent a good 2 or 3 years just studying, literally just figuring out what is happening in this place, right? Actually, I take that back. It's been decades just figuring out. Every stage of life required a recalibration that way. But I think as I've gotten older and the stress of that, the stress of adapting all the time, the double, triple consciousness of the things, that became too much, the stress. And then I stopped because I was like, I can't do this anymore.
Um, I have to say before we even get started, I found your TED Talk in like
Mm-hmm.
2019, and that TED Talk about women's rage um, really shaped the way that I viewed and moved through the world on a personal level,
Mm-hmm.
because I was so used to I had this internalized belief that like women are not supposed to be angry. And if you are angry, you're supposed to
Mm.
stuff it, stuff, stuff, stuff. Because
I
that's what I've
mean, so
seen.
many.
Yeah, and that's what I've
I had
seen.
that.
hmm I've seen my mom, my grandma, this is like a generational thing. And
Mhm.
so that really put me on like a path of like learning to use my voice and like not shrinking. And
Mhm.
then I had a friend who gave me this book called Rage Becomes Her. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. This was like 2022. I was like, oh, that's so
Oh, that's
interesting.
funny.
I was like,
Yes,
I
clearly
remember.
you're gravitating towards the theme.
Yeah, I was like, oh, this is such an interesting book because I was like, I remember this lady. She gave a TED Talk, and I saw that like a few years ago. And yeah, I'll read this book. Um, and it sat on my shelf until 2024. And in 2024, I had a major health condition that I got diagnosed with and had to have a surgery that basically put me on bed rest for the
Oh
last
no.
2 months of 2024 to
Yes.
like recover. And a lot of it I realized was related to stress. And
Mhm.
I did not realize that anger was a form of stress. And
Mhm.
so I had 2 months and I
That's
sat and I was
funny.
like,
You
let me
did.
read this book. And then I was like, this is the same lady. And
This
I
is the
tell
same
you,
lady. She's
yeah,
fixated.
yeah, I blazed through that book.
Yeah.
And it really changed the way that I view my work. Because for the longest, I just thought, I'll just push through, I'll power through. But
Yeah.
literally after that happened and having in part read your book, it really shaped a lot of the way that it left me with the question of, okay, if I have rage and anger, I think of it now as a sacred tool and like what can I do with that? And
Right.
um the other part was, okay, I have this rage and I have this anger, what do I do with it? But like how can I put this into the world in such a way that it can really shape the lives of other Black, Indigenous women and femmes of color? And so yeah, it's really informed a lot a lot of
I'm
how
so
I
glad to hear.
even
I mean, that's why writers write.
yeah.
It's really heartening to hear that. Yes, I mean, all of that resonate. I also have had a 3 month bed rest that I will never forget. I mean, terrible, but also you have to figure out what to do with yourself. So I'm glad this helped you. But yeah, I think that that's really a familiar feeling, like learning not to recognize the anger, not to use it, and then wanting it to be generative and to bring other people good, and that was really important to me in writing the book because my starting point was that I didn't want girls and women to end up hurting themselves the way I had because I didn't understand this thing, you
Mhm.
know. And so thank you for
Yeah,
reading it
you're
and using
welcome.
it.
Um, I was curious while reading this book because I think that women's rage and anger is just always
Mm.
delegitimized in many ways. How was it actually getting this like presenting this to publishers and like where was it receptive?
So presenting it to publishers was quite easy because at the time I was writing almost every day about these issues. I was very vocal. I was an activist. And there was just so much in the air. And so I felt very strongly that the zeitgeist needed articulation. And that so when my agent proposed the book, there was an immediate positive uptake for the book. Because I think frankly, like publishing is a very feminized industry. And it's also, frankly, a very white industry. And I think the shock of Trump, particularly to white women in America, was what it was in that moment, you know? And so there was a lot of uptake for the ideas. And it also came out, and this helped all of us, I think. Dr. Brittany Cooper wrote her book, Eloquent Rage, and Rebecca Traister wrote her book, Good and Mad. And then I had my book. And I kind of chuckled because you had a prominent Black intellectual woman, a white prominent writer, and then me, who's kind of ambiguously brown. Is she Hispanic? Is she Arab? Is she Muslim? Is she, what is she? Right? Sort of ping ponging between the two in the media, you know? So, but I think there was just this moment. There was clearly this feeling, what is happening? And I would say that right now, in the wake of the Epstein files, that's happening again, even more, frankly, than Me Too.
Mm.
Um, you know, there's sort of these waves of rage that they sort of build and build and then explode, and then there's fallout. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm so thankful that you wrote the book. I think that's one of for sure one of those evergreen books. I This
Yeah,
might
I
sound
don't think those
wild.
issues go away.
Yeah. I mean, it might sound crazy, but I hope that at some point maybe your book will become irrelevant and it'll just be like a historical
That's the
piece.
goal, right? I know. The goal of anger is to eliminate itself.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I know. I would hope so too. I sadly, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
No, no, probably not. But I think that
Yeah.
even having written it and created conversation, and like I said, my work was inspired in part by your work. Like, I think that
Mhm.
maybe not in my lifetime, my kids, grandkids, but I think just having the
Yeah.
saying the thing, talking about it is so
Saying the
important.
things out loud. I
Hmm.
agree with you. And
Yeah.
just so that, and my other goal was, I think a lot of us feel it, we intuit it, we have these experiences, particularly in adolescence or even as young girls, and then there's no language around it,
Hmm.
nothing. It's just prohibition, you know? And so giving people the words and the intellectual constructs, I hope is helpful, you know?
Yeah.
That's really, yeah. Sometimes I would like to, I've talked to my agent about this, but literally create some way to get it into the hands of younger girls and women, you know, so that they don't develop the pathologies in adolescence, so that they can recognize what's happening, you know. That should be parents, but I've lost kind of faith in adults. So,
Uh, uh,
you know.
well, can we take a step back? I'm curious to
Mhm.
know what was it like growing up? And
Oh, wow.
yeah.
So I grew up in the Bahamas, and it was still a colony when I was a child. We didn't get our independence until 1973. And I also grew up with a Haitian father, not a Bahamian father, which mattered in lots of ways, many, many different ways for many reasons. He was also Arab. And so I had the experience of having a Bahamian family, but also being perceived as an immigrant family in a country that was going through decolonization. And you don't think about those things when you're 7, 8, 9, but you feel those things when you're 7, 8, 9. You know, when you're a really young child, particularly I think in a small society like that, there are only 380,000 people in the Bahamas. When you live cheek by jowl with everybody, when probably you're an observant child, there's so much incoherence. I would say that the defining feature of my childhood was incoherence. You know, just the racism and the sexism and the confusion that people were experiencing in this really fraught historical time. We also, in my memory, went from being oriented towards the Britain and the British Commonwealth because we had a queen, we had the governor, we had all the accoutrement of colonialism, our educations, right? We went from that to a sharp pivot to America upon independence because we were only half an hour offshore of Florida. And it just made more sense to orient the country that way. But when that happened, I always associate it with the flood of fast food into the country, the arrival of massive cruise ships with American tourists. And frankly, those weren't good things. Those were bad things, you know. They brought a lot of money into the country, but they also facilitated the Colombian drug trade. And anyway, that I just I mean, I had a really good childhood because I was much loved, but I think I was just watching it all the time, you know, and also in school, mm, school was just a very diverse, dynamic place where all of this was happening too. You know, there was just, I just remember a lot of feelings and a lot of quiet thinking about all the things, you know. Um, it was interesting. It was never boring. I will say that. But it was just a really incredible time in retrospect. It was a real change. It was the whole world was shifting. And there was this time between sort of 1968 and 1984 that it happened. And that happened to be my childhood and adolescence.
Hmm. Yeah, that's
So when I came here, yeah, but I will say this, when I came to the US, I was 16. And the first thing that struck me in my school was the racial segregation. I had not encountered that because it's a majority Black country and there are very few white people. And some of those white people are foreigners. And like there were no other Haitian, Lebanese, Bahamian families. I mean, there were just, you know, there wasn't, there's our family, you know. So it's not like in that society you could have the rigidity that existed in the United States, you know. And so that really bowled me over.
Did you, I mean, those are incredibly formative years.
Mm.
Um, did you ever try to talk about it with any of your family? I mean, if
Not really, to be honest. I don't remember talking to anybody about it. I I did have one trusted adult, my great aunt, who was very authoritative, very acerbic, really loving, very opinionated. So I more or less didn't talk to her. I just listened to her. You know, it was different. You didn't talk to people when you were that age, not adults. You just listened to the adults. Um, and then I had some very special teachers who were willing, I think, to recognize a quiet girl and give her books and talk to her about ideas. That's really what happened, you know.
um, can you tell me about one of your teachers? Like what?
Oh, I can tell you about three of my teachers. There's three. One was Miss Sandlands, and she fell asleep in class regularly. She just put her head, it was very hot. She would fall asleep. But when she wasn't falling asleep, she just insisted that we read and that we pay attention to the world through books. And she provided those books, and she clearly loved those books, you know. So she was a big, well, also Mrs. Bethel, she was my head of school. And she was just so large and in charge that but you're just like, wow. I just remember thinking, no crisis is too big a crisis for Mrs. Bethel, you know? And then there was a teacher, he was a man, he was from Texas, and he came out of the sky for me. I mean, I was like, who is this guy? He's like unlike any other teacher that I have, but he was a science teacher. And I really loved science. And I won the science award in fifth grade. And I still have that book, you know. And I just think, you know, this is a situation where I probably wouldn't have done that unless he had cultivated that in me. Like I just would not, it just wouldn't have happened, you know. So there were important teachers. There really were. Um, and then the other one was a woman named Mrs. Ansell. And I called her. She was 84. I called her maybe 10 years ago to thank her because I could find her. And we had a really delightful conversation. She was my sixth grade teacher. So yeah, those teachers were really important, you know, and they were from all over the world. They were Bahamian, American, English. One was from India, Miss Bhatnagar. Like it was a really cosmopolitan, small place. And also that totally shaped my worldview. Like that totally shaped my worldview. All of these people were remarkably different, and they had gathered in this tiny little island to teach us. So
That's incredible.
yeah.
I think that's so cool, and I love that it seems like they gave you space to be inquisitive.
Well, that's one way to look at it. They did give me space to be inquisitive. I would say typical Gen X, I was raised by wolves, right? I mean, I was very loved, but there was no oversight. There wasn't a great deal of, you know, post 9/11, the manic mothering, the helicopter parenting, that really defined a generation. Everybody was so petrified that, yes, you know, right? That was not my childhood. I was so stunned by that. As a mother, I was like, what is happening here? This is lunacy, right? But that was not my childhood. We were really, really, really left to our own devices. So I think for me, even having adults pay attention at all, like the way those teachers did, was just amazing, you know?
Gosh, I'm
Yeah.
kind of jealous of that. Although I do think that, like, here in the States, like I remember my mom would talk about like hearing like it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your kids are? Like I do think
Oh,
that's
yeah,
kind
that
of
was an ad.
crazy, but
Mm.
I do love that y'all had that ability to just kind of
Well, we
go.
had real freedom.
Yeah, like you weren't tethered to a phone. And yeah,
We
I
weren't tethered
never.
to the house.
Yeah, right. And I didn't
Yeah.
really get that experience. I mean, I was born in 93, so
No.
I remember a time
Yeah.
before cell phones and like when
Mhm.
dial-up was like really like a new thing. But
Yeah. You could
my
hear it.
teenage years, like middle school up, I had a cell phone. I wasn't necessarily, I remember
Yeah.
being somewhat like I remember it still being a novelty, so it wasn't something that was like here at all times but with me. Like I remember
Always here.
losing it at times, but
Yeah.
yeah, I do envy y'all's generation for
Yeah. It's a
having
real
that.
loss, I think.
Yeah.
I
Mm.
mean, as parents, we really resisted that. Like the schools that our kids went to at some point introduced tablets. And we were like, no, no, we don't want those. We don't want them in the house. We don't want them in the bedrooms under no circumstances. And then the phones just became they were just everywhere. And honestly, because it wasn't even because kids were being given free rein, a lot of it was because certainly among wealthiest communities, kids were doing sports. They needed to go. They needed, you know, and that then became everything, right? And so, yeah, we didn't have anything. We did nothing like that, like nothing, you know. So, yeah, it was very different.
Yeah. How have you, because I know you do have a daughter, how were you able to kind of balance, like toe that line between?
Well, probably not very well. We have three daughters, and in their adolescence, so a few years after you, late 90s, early aughts, um, we we, for example, didn't allow any social media, until they were 15. For the oldest one, that got much harder for the younger ones because then it wasn't just like, no, you can't have Facebook. Then it was everything, Snapchat, Instagram, Ask FM. There were lots of them along the way, and it became the way kids became friends. So that was harder to navigate. It was easier in 2000 to 2007. It got much harder after that. I would
Mhm.
say by 2009, it was virtually impossible because the schools were also using the media this way,
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, it was difficult. And, kids are going to see other kids. And so part of it to me was also you cannot just do something because of peer pressure. That's like a very bad life lesson. So no, but it doesn't matter because eventually, even as adults, we're all immersed in it. We're all trying to figure out now, how do we detach? How do we put the phone down? How do we stop? Which I think is great. But our lives are so entwined with this technology that it's hard.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I mean, at the like, beginning of this year, I deleted like 75% of my social media.
Yeah.
So no
Yeah.
Facebook, no TikTok, no Pinterest,
Yeah.
no Instagram,
Yeah.
all of that. So I
That's
only
amazing. I haven't gone that far yet.
I had to go
Yeah.
cold
It's
turkey
hard.
because I've tried for years to,
Yeah.
I'm going to limit to 1 hour a day and it doesn't work. I
Mm.
don't, I was like, I have to go cold turkey. So I have LinkedIn and I have YouTube.
Yeah.
And the YouTube is literally just to post videos that, interviews and stuff
Yeah.
from Reverb and Root. But
Mhm.
um yeah, it's a challenge and I'm
It is a
wondering
challenge.
I'm wondering if I mean, I have lots of feelings about it was more than just my screen time. It was also about surveillance and
Oh, yeah,
all
that's
of
the
that
thing.
and data and
It's super
exploitation.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even as a writer, I have a very small platform, relatively speaking, but there's very little you can do to avoid it professionally in my case, I feel, because I have to share what I'm writing, especially since I'm not on staff anywhere. There's no on staff anywhere anymore. So I have a Substack and I could just live there, but I don't because in fact I have very little audience there. I just started, so I use Instagram mainly. That's how I share the articles. But the surveillance problem, it feels totalitizing. It feels like there's nowhere to go
Mhm.
because once you're in one of the systems, especially Google, you're in, you know, th-
Yeah. Well, I even divested from Google. I switched to Proton Mail.
yeah. I have a
But
Proton Mail account, but it's been hard for me to shift people.
yeah, because Google Drive or if someone sends you a Google Doc, it's all
It's
they make
all
it
there.
yeah.
Yeah. And even if I stopped using Google, as you say, like I work with various organizations, they all use Google Docs. So, I can't force them not to use Google Docs.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard.
Yeah.
Not an easy problem.
Mm-mm.
It's kind of like AI. Even if you try not to use AI, it's embedded in everything now. I'm
Yeah.
just like, I don't even have a choice in many contexts. It's just happening, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I I think a lot about divesting as much as I can from capitalism. I'm trying to focus on
Hmm.
decolonizing my mind, my
Hmm.
mindset, like all of that.
Yeah.
And when you start the journey, it is like
Mm.
pulling the thread on a sweater
Oh
and you
yeah.
start to realize that everything, it's in everything.
It's in
Um,
everything and it's in everything. And I think like, I write a lot about masculinity. because I think that, as you say, you can pull the thread, but you actually can't exit.
Mm,
You can't totally, I mean, to totally exit is a totally other conversation. Like I know what you're talking about, but the thing that really gets me about capitalism is the way it shapes identity from birth,
mm,
right? Like, even if we said we're going to decolonize our love, relationships, our work, whatever, we're still left with identities, people's identities, you know? And I think a lot about how, for so many men, more than women, even, I think it's more than women, the conflation of their goodness with productivity and labor and money is so corrosive to everything, to all of us. You know, it's not quite the same for women. We have other things, but right now I'm fixated on this because it's, if you could dislodge that, if you could dislodge that, maybe it would be helpful for more, for changing systems, you know.
yeah. No, I agree. That will be many lifetimes, I feel. The
Many
how.
lifetimes,
Uh,
many
but
lifetimes.
but speaking of identity, I'm curious to know you've how do you um hold all of your identities, if that makes sense, from living in the Bahamas to coming here to the States and with your, family heritage and history, how do you hold it? How have you preserved it? Did you feel any pressure
I
to
mean, honestly, it's
assimilate,
kind of hard.
Mm,
It's just hard sometimes, you know. Everyone has their difficulties, and this is not a terrible hardship, but I think that I think that assimilating is easy for someone like me for a variety of reasons. But I also think that it's harmful in lots of ways because you have to shed entire parts of yourself all the time to do that. And so I think when I first got here and I was a teenager, I spent a good 2 or 3 years just studying, literally just figuring out what is happening in this place, right? Actually, I take that back. It's been decades just figuring out. Every stage of life required a recalibration that way. But I think as I've gotten older, and the stress of that, the stress of adapting all the time, the double, triple consciousness of the things, that became too much, the stress. And then I stopped because I was like, I can't do this anymore, you know? And I just remember sometimes along the way, people would say, I'd say something and they'd say, oh my God, I forgot that, you know, you're not American in that way, or you're not white in this way, or you know what, your idea of marriage is very different from my idea, you know, that like just things that people say. So I think what's been helpful though is, to me, the concept of third culture kids. Third, like, that just really resonated with me because I grew up a third culture kid, and then I had third culture kids. And in fact, most of us are in third culture spaces, that we just are. And yet there's hadn't been a name for that before. And so I really liked that. It helped me a lot. It helped me a lot as a parent try and figure that out. But I think that, you know, work wise, it's still a slippery proposition,
in
you
what
know, and
way?
I think some of it is my ethnic ambiguity. I think that it's unsettling to people who really want to put people in boxes. You know, they just want to know where you are in the thing. Where are you in the ladder, the hierarchy, the taxonomy? And it's a little unsettling to some people,
Mm.
you know.
You said that at some point it just became too much. Was it like a culmination of things, or was it something in
I think it
particular?
was. I mean, I think it was actually what led me to write Rage Becomes Her, because it wasn't until my 40s when I started to actually feel like I was physically spent and falling apart. And yet there was no clear reason for it. I was safe. I was financially secure. I was in a happy family, all the things that you would assume would generate good health or good outcomes. And I was so stressed. And then I went back. I had been a feminist activist and writer, and then I'd stopped because I wanted food. I wanted food. I wanted clothes. I was like, oh, I really need some shoes. I'm not making any money. I just can't keep doing this work. So I stopped and I pivoted, and I did that for about 15 years. And then I was like, no, no, I can't sustain this. I really want to do this other work. And it's not going to be a financially sound decision that I'm making, but I will be a healthy, happier person. My family will be healthier and happier. And that did happen. And I think it was just, why am I pretending all the time to be someone I'm not, or just trying to subsume myself constantly? And a big part of that was subsuming the anger that I felt, and I think for some people, and I think a lot in terms of moral circles, some of us have tiny moral circles and others have expansive moral circles. I think for a lot of people, they couldn't fathom being angry on behalf of others,
Mm.
and I still think that's true. I think that's a big difference, frankly, between conservatives and progressives, right? If
Yeah.
you aren't angry on behalf of others and you're doing just okay, then you're gonna put your head down and do what you're expected to, you know?
Hmm. That you saying about why am I like pretending or putting on for others, that I feel like for some people that can be a lifetime of working
Always,
through.
right?
I was talking to my husband, and we were talking about how life is kind of like architecture.
Mm,
And so when you're a kid, it's like you basically just placed into this forest, and that's like your whole world. And then when you get to your 20s, you realize like, oh, I have tools. I can like this forest doesn't have to be here. I can clear something out
right.
and build something there. And then I think
Yes.
your 30s is like laying the foundation, just kind of smoothing things out, pulling up roots and things like that. And I think of I think of the process of reaching a point where you can, to the best of your ability, try to be just who you are. Because it's exhausting
If you're
to not,
lucky,
if you're lucky,
if you're lucky,
and
if you're
have to.
lucky, like
Mhm.
really,
Yeah. I
I
think of,
think a lot of people never get there.
yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And I understand there's definitely obviously a level of incredible privilege to be able to shed as many layers as you can of other expectations and
Mhm.
um, but there is some real freedom in being able to stop pretending. I'm still
Right.
working through that. I've done a
I
lot
am
with
too.
therapy and stuff, and I think maybe it's a
Yeah.
whole lifetime, because like you said, capitalism, it's from birth. It's like all of these belief systems are from birth, and so a lot of times you're not even aware of what you're not aware
No,
of.
all of our subjectivities are shaped
Yeah.
by it.
Hmm.
I think privilege, but I also think for some of us, it just is necessity.
Yeah.
Because if you feel like you're drowning, you just feel like I can't do this anymore,
Yeah.
you know, and that's good. I wish I had been younger, I think it's good that if you can do it as early as possible. Not easy. I don't want to suggest any of it's easy because I don't think
Right.
it's easy. Um, yeah, but capitalism is it's everything,
Yeah.
you know.
How old would you say you were, around how old were you when you said you wish you were younger when you could have gotten to that point, but would you say
Well,
there's
I
like
think,
a time frame?
I mean, there was never a time when I wasn't in opposition to the systems I was in. Let me say that, right? I mean, I always felt in friction I always felt like this is wrong. This is not right. That something is wrong. And that was since I was very little, very little. I just remember the feeling. I think a lot of us have the feeling of injustice and a sensitivity to injustice. Not everyone has it. Some people blithely go about their business. They don't feel it. I have come to learn that, but I had it. And so for me, that took the form of speaking openly about sexism, but not feeling that I had the right to talk about racism because I didn't even know where I fell in the world of race. And not just that, when I came to the United States, race was defined so differently. It was it was shocking to me, right? I was like, wait a minute. I was already a little confused, trying to sort myself out, trying to figure out why and how, but this is madness in an extreme form here, right? And so it's just different if you're in the Bahamas or in the Caribbean and then you come here. It's just a different thing. It's different when you go to Europe. It's different when you go to parts of Africa. So that was when I just thought I've got to stay in my lane and just talk about women because I don't really know. And so I would say it took me decades to think, what do I know? What have I learned? What do I believe? What can I do? And that was, I would say, I would say I had a pretty solid feminist grounding by the time I was 20. I was completely immersed for a long time. I knew exactly what I believed. And I was lucky because the year I took my first women's studies class was like a year or two before Kimberly Crenshaw wrote Intersectionality.
Mm.
And so my feminist adult education started with her work, right? It started with my exposure to Black feminist thinkers in the United States. I was the right age. I was in a place that I had an excellent professor. So then I was like, oh my God, this is making so much sense. Everything is making so much sense, and that then took me, I would say, another 20 years, 20 years solidly of just trying to listen to people and learn. And then I kind of hit 40 and I was like, okay, I got to do something now,
Mm.
you know. But everybody has to do it at their own pace. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But the capitalist part, I don't know. Have you read any Mark Fisher?
No.
You read Capital? I think you might like to read Mark Fisher. It's interesting to put with the decolonial stuff,
What's the
you
name of
know.
the book?
Well, he wrote several, but I'm thinking of capitalist realism.
Okay.
It's just interesting culturally in this moment to look at what he wrote. Um,
I will definitely check that out. And I won't wait 2 years to actually
oh, I
read the
know, I
book.
know. It's a short book. You could read that in an afternoon.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I feel like I don't know. I feel like I'll definitely read this book because I feel like we're in this in between kind of liminal space right now between old structures and something that's not here yet.
Hmm.
And
I
I
agree.
I wish I would have talked to my great grandpa about that because
Yeah.
he lived through many periods of this old structure, but this thing that hasn't quite come yet. Do you feel it? And if so, like, how are you kind of navigating that?
I feel like we're really at an inflection point. I'm not sure which way it will go.
Mm,
Sometimes the power seems so absolute and it's more and more concentrated and it's part of all the systems we've talked about and that's very daunting.
mhm,
But at the same time, just if you look at history, you know that nothing is certain, that there are always unintended consequences, that there are always unpredictable changes that can come in any form, like a pandemic, like a climate disaster. Like we just don't know, you know? And so I'm not sure. Sometimes I joke with my husband that I wish I just were alive 700 years from now and had a bowl of popcorn and could watch history, like watch history happen. Because I think
Hmm.
we're really at this very major turning point in human history. And we talk always about technical acceleration, but not enough about the socio-technical acceleration, not about what the technical acceleration is doing to social and political life. We need to talk much more about that, you know?
Yeah.
And what I think is interesting also, this is going to sound totally woo-woo, but computer science as we've known it has really been shaped by Enlightenment principles, binaries, structures of thought that are part of all these systems. Quantum science, quantum computing is nothing like this. And I don't think you can have that computing without it altering everything, not just the speed with which people compute, you know,
Hmm.
not even in terms of quantum effects. I mean, social and political life will be revolutionized, and we don't talk about it, you know.
Yeah.
So I think a lot about Donna Haraway's work, um, xenofeminism, all those things. Just okay, how do you string all of the things together, you know,
Yeah.
they're all in a constellation.
Yeah.
And it would just be fun intellectually to think about if any of us had the time.
Right. I think what I tell myself, I've been saying it more and more, is that anything can change at any moment. And
At
I
any moment.
at any moment. And it gives me hope more so than anxiety because there is a other side to
That's
that.
good.
But
Yeah.
you are absolutely right. There are always unintended consequences.
Well,
Uh,
we just don't know.
you have no
Like I
idea.
think a lot, yeah, I think a lot about the early days of COVID, which were horrible.
Yeah.
But also, I remember reaching a point where I was like, this moment right now is not bad. Like maybe 2 months later, and then thinking, this happens every 100 years. My grandparents, my great grandparents went through this.
Yeah.
You know, the world literally turned upside down in a way you know, on a Monday, we would have laughed at the idea, but by Friday, we were just living in a totally different world.
Yeah. And
So,
as horrible as COVID was, and I I think it'll be very interesting to see how historians write about COVID.
mm,
Um, but I will say the ability for humans to adapt to it
yeah.
in spite of all of just the horror of it all.
Mm.
That gives me that I had never seen or experienced. I mean, none of us had ever seen or experienced anything like that, but
None of us had ever experienced anything like it, except your
right.
grandfather.
No, yeah, yeah. Actually, when was the Spanish flu? Was
What
it
year did he die?
19? He died.
19.
Yeah, so he was born in 1923 because he passed
Oh, so he
away.
was still though, he was in the world
Yeah.
of post-pandemic world.
Yeah. I think that the human's ability to adapt gives me hope. The unintended consequences of things gives me
Yeah.
hope. His saying that time changes things as someone
Mhm.
who lived to be 101 gives me hope.
Yeah.
Um, and I know we've talked a lot about rage and capitalism and all the things, but I would love to pivot to talk about joy. and
Yes.
what's inspiring you, what brings you joy.
Yes.
Um,
So
yeah.
I will say, in line with hope, I know things are god awful. I know how bad they are. And I know how bad certain people want them to get, like
Mhm.
want it to get, right? But I constantly am saying to people, don't forget that even the backlash always levels up. Even the right has to talk about how diverse it is, right? Even the kind of fascist Barbie people, they get to go to school. They get to own their own bank accounts. They are leading feminist lives, all of them, you know? So even though we're in this retrenchment, the baseline for what constitutes normal life reflects all the work people did over the past century, right? And so we just have to acknowledge the leveling up, even though it doesn't look the way we want it to, it doesn't feel the way we want it to. The fact is that we have totally revolutionized the world. We have completely changed it in a remarkably short amount of time.
Yeah.
You know, like if you just think from 1960, for example, to now, the difference for people like you and me, it's night and day, you know? And so we just have to remember that. And that, you know, I was reading something really interesting. It was actually about sex, and it was about focusing on desire or focusing on pleasure. And I think it was Emily Nagoski, but all I could think of was capitalism. I was like, capitalism. That's such a good frame to dismantle capitalism, right? Like it is, I know other people have thought about this, but it was just funny in the moment when these women, I think, were talking about orgasm. I thought, oh, this is why women have better sex under socialism, or, you know, whatever it is. And that actually made me laugh. I was like, okay, all right, you have to get some sleep or maybe read a novel or something, you know? But I think, yeah, I think pleasure, I think all of the work that's being done around pleasure and rest and Trisha Hersey's work, you know,
Mhm.
I just think that's really important. And again, deeply decolonial,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
There is another book. It's really dense, but I think you would like it if you haven't read it, called The Intimacies of Four Continents.
No, I haven't heard of that one. I
It's
will write
history
that one down
told from
too.
the history told from the water, from the Atlantic and the Caribbean. It's told from the basin as opposed to from the land masses. So instead of American history, South American history, African history, European history, it's all centered on the basin.
Wow.
So very, very interesting. It is pretty dense though.
I
All
ask
right.
this to a lot of folks, but what is something that you are looking forward to in the near future? And I ask this because I find that when I think about hope, and especially in a
Mm.
world that feels hopeless, I say if you have plans for the future, even if it's like the near future, or if you are planning a project or you are planning to meet with people, like there's got to be some level of hope that you have to be
Oh,
planned.
I agree.
You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Yes. Well, this is funny. I have a dear friend and writing collaborator. We've written a lot of long form investigative pieces over the last 12 years. And we we've only met in person maybe four times in that whole 5 times maybe in that whole time, but we're a hive brain. We love working together and we're planning a book. And I laugh because I think anyone who plans a book in this moment of time is pretty unrealistic, like unhinged, like you know. And actually that's what the book is about. The book is about what it means to be in this technical environment that we're in. And it gives me hope because in fact I think people are learning how to resist the technical environment and to be conscious about it.
Mm.
And in fact, once you start that, even if it's just personally, I don't want to be addicted, then you go down a path of unintended consequences where people can really start to see why they are addicted, who benefits from their addiction, what systems depend on that, right? So that it actually gives me hope when people say, I should read a book, or I'm not going to be watching Instagram ever again. Like those are tiny little things that build and build and build and build. I like the microcosms, the micro hopes, you know.
Mm, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for
It's such a pleasure to talk to
agreeing to
you.
sit with me. I have so enjoyed this conversation. Again, I was so nervous to send you an
Oh,
email.
no. You
And
should know I get nervous every time I speak, literally.
really? Okay, well
Oh, yeah. My
that
throat
makes me
goes
feel
like
better.
this.